Jacksonville, a child was born who couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts for poor whites and blacks and their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talked for hours. It was a barefoot history of this land of flowers.
The week that was 1st of June 2019 from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. We always open with Stetson Kennedy and his amazing work at in Florida, his anti-racist work there. We can never say enough about it, in Buchahatchee, and some of the work that he did also in the WPA. He had Woody Guthrie there, he had Zora Hurston there, and various other artists there, and they're still there today. Check out the Stetson Kennedy Foundation. It's always there. We always have a link to it. The week it was is what we try to do is spotlight some of the events of the past week and try to connect them up with a continual history, and more of that is being done now than in the past. In the past, history of presidential campaigns, history of various political crusades were written after the fact. I remember in 1968, well actually in the early 70s, we were studying the 1968 election. That was one of the things that universities did. Michigan was at the forefront of studying that, studying the election. And now we are a little bit more current with that. On Friday Java, we usually have the people from the University of Virginia, Larry Sabato's shop. We'll have the handicapper Charlie Cook and present his latest article on the election. Also Amy Walder. We have a mix of people from the center, as Mr. Cook is, Amy Walter, and we have George Will talking about the presidency. There'll be several articles that talk about the presidency and the idea of impeachment and where impeachment is going, a little bit of the historical, some of the things that we look at. I'm not certain that we'll look at very much polling, because there has not been a lot of polling lately. Mr. Cook mentions one or two polls, but basically it's a little bit early to talk about it, where the candidates are. As we move through the month of June, it will become more apparent where we're going. Now here's Uncle Carl. Uncle Carl is talking about Stacey Abrams won't go away since losing, and he's writing in the Wall Street Journal on the 30th of May 2019. He starts out by saying, since losing the governor's race in Georgia, Stacey Abrams has given self-pity a bad name. I did win, she said, still insisting, making a fantastic claim of a stolen election, which she is correct about. Says the governor, Brian Kemp, holds the office only because it was not a free and fair election, never mind a 53,000 vote margin of victory. She is hoping that repeating a falsehood, and this is something DJ Trump has been very good at doing, and it has worked for him, and pave her way to the governorship in 2020, if not the presidency this year. The candidate Joe Lunchbox Biden had talked about featuring her as a vice presidential candidate. Of course, he didn't get around to asking her about it. How the Democrats respond to Abrams' unsupported and incendiary claims. They selected her to give the State of the Union response to DJ Trump. Ms. Abrams' indictment of Kemp, the former Secretary of State, starts the accusation that he closed or moved polling locations, which he did. She contends that created confusion and meant that African Americans faced hour-long lines waiting to cast their ballots, but by law, the voting places are selected by an independent county election board, not the Secretary of State. There's been a lot of controversy in Palm Beach County, and the lady in charge there, I forget her name right now, Dr. whatever, has retired. But there's always been problems in Florida. This is one reason, this is in Palm Beach, Florida. Anyway, in Georgia, yeah, it's a little different empire there. Excuse me. Long lines affected Georgians of all races past November, as turnout rose from 259 million, that was in 2014, to 395 million in 2018, the biggest ever total in the Peach State. Abrams claimed that Georgia was ground zero for suppression of African American voters. No doubt about that. They moved the goalposts around several times in Georgia. Abrams also argued that Kemp would use the state's exact match, which he did to disenfranchise voters of color. The law requires basic information on voter registration applications to match on the Florida driver's license list. In Social Security records, the state issued IDs for those who don't drive. Kemp's office notified 53,000 registrants that their applications didn't match, and many of those were false matches. Informed them that under the law, they had 26 months to correct their forms. In the meantime, they could still vote after showing a photo ID, which is required of all Georgians. And that is one of the elements of voting suppression there. If we had a national vote system, a voter registration system, as many modern industrial capitalist countries do, people would be automatically registered to vote. The majority would at age 18. There would not be a problem there. And there would be this national database. But what happens here, even in federal elections, the states run omnipotent. To stir the pot, according to Uncle Carl, Abrams frequently points out that while 32% of Georgians are African Americans, 73% of the erroneous forms were from African Americans. She failed to mention that registration drives she led submitting more than a quarter of the flawed forms. What happened there was she was using paper ballots, and it was not accessing into his system. This is a situation where the state of Georgia used a different type of registration than they did. Then there's a Georgia use it or lose it law passed by Democratic legislature, signed by Democratic governor. Now that's way back over 20 years ago in 1997 that says if a voter hasn't shown up at the polls or has contacted the election authorities saying by signing a petition or updating address, in 3 years the state must notify him, and he uses him, it could be him or she, at risk of becoming inactive if he doesn't return the postage paid card or participate in either of the next two federal elections. He is purged from the rolls at least in a 6-year process. The problem was many of the people purged never got a notice because they had moved. The office removed 1.4 million names from the rolls. That was started in 2012, erasing a backlog he inherited. Still active registrants grew from 5 million, basically, when he was elected, to 6,428,000 last fall. That's a 27% increase. Much of the bump came from Kemp's implemented automatic voter registration for Georgians who update or apply for driver's license, or for their part, Abrams never worked to repeal the use it or lose it match law. How does he know that? In fact, when she criticized Kemp for reducing opportunities for early voting, she not only voted to require him to rein in early voting, but co-sponsored law. Now, this is in 2011. What Uncle Carl is doing is highlighting laws that have been around 8, 9, or 10 years. The election scenario in Georgia has changed in the last two presidential elections. It started with Barack Obama in 2008, 2012. Turnouts were different, but at the same time, what you have in Georgia is the urban areas around Atlanta and some of the other cities, and then you have rural Georgia, which is a substantial part, and some of the suburbs and extraburbs out there. And this is part of the dynamic in Georgia. She was in charge of a voter registration. Stacey Abrams, and she has formed an organization to bring this about. The last real progressive run in Georgia was when Jimmy Carter of Plains was elected a governor. Since then, they've had some so-called Democrats in, but they were pretty much compromise candidates. And basically, Andy Young actually ran for governor at one time, dropped out. But again, this is indicative of many states that are changing. The abortion law in Georgia, with its film industry, a reaction by some of the major studios that they will pull out of the state, thus bringing about thousands of job loss and billions of dollars in monies, which is tax revenue the state of Georgia could get. It's very, very difficult in 2019 to run a 1952 program. Herman Talmadge is long gone, and thus the state of Georgia has to modernize. But with this particular governor, they're not modernizing at all. It's basically the same situation that they have. Let me go to the Miami Herald. DJ Trump will kick off his Georgia, Florida campaign. They're very related. In 2020 bid here, this is in the Herald, theme park capital of Florida will soon play host to a different type of spectacle. They got that right, like Disney World visitors checking out the new Star Wars gallery, Eagle, the rides later summer. Supporters of DJ Trump will be on the scene in Orlando. The campaign kickoff will be on the 18th of June. The part-time Florida resident announced via his communication link Twitter. Well, it will take place at the Amway Center where the Orlando Magic team plays. The arena seats 20,000 people, and they'll have tickets there. But one thing to be remembered when you see these Trump rallies, particularly Trump rallies, people will be coming, excuse me, from all over. And they're going to mention one of the segments of diverse electorate is a Puerto Rican, who make up 31% of adult Latinos in Florida. That's according to the Pew Center. Trump has been criticized by Puerto Ricans, particularly Ms. Cruz, the mayor of San Juan. One segment, but his campaign manager, this is Brian Parscale, told reporters in Miami that the internal polling from 19 shows Trump making inroads with Latino voters in Florida. Last year, Rick Scott announced his campaign in Orlando, also his attempt to appeal to the state's growing Puerto Rican population. 1 million Puerto Ricans live in Florida, mostly in Tampa and in Orlando. But only about 208,000 are registered voters. The path to victory is Florida. That's Joe Ganners. He was the manager of the Trump 16 campaign, and they're talking about mostly out in the Panhandle. Thought we'd bring this one up, what Trump plans to do in Florida and outlaw state. What the progressive community, Democratic Party, will do in Florida is interesting. I suppose you'd have to check out Hallie Castor Jane's broadcast, otherwise known as the Infamous H. She specializes more of that and lives somewhere close to where DJ Trump resides. Let's move on here. Well, we do the Cook Report first. Yeah, I guess we will. We'll do the Cook Report, and let's get on to it here. We'll do Mr. Cook. He's writing on the 28th of May. It is hardly novel to see the electorate as split into three groups: one side, the other side, and those in the middle. Well, that's been long argued in American politics. V.O.K. talked about that. The side passionately supporting DJ Trump, that's about 35%. The late great Jerry Pippin always talked about that. The idea is you build on your so-called 35% of core voters. The side adamantly opposed to DJ Trump is about 45%. So that means they basically need about 5 to 6% swing there, and DJ is toast. The middle is somewhere between 15 and 20%. That's not necessarily, that's more of a national stance. In some states it's a little bit different. In states that matter, the numbers are derived from measuring those who strongly approve or disapprove of the performance, as well as those who say they definitely support or definitely oppose the re-election of ODJ. National polls released by Monmouth University this week showed many voters in the middle moving away from Trump. That's to be expected. 37% of registered voters surveyed thought that the president should be re-elected. A little bit different there. 37% gain of 2 points, while 60% felt it was time to have someone else. Trial heated polling, both national and key states, and CBS and many of them moving to what they call the battleground states, if there are any these days, Today Trump is not ahead, tied in 20 of the states, plus District of Columbia, carried by Hillary Clinton. Worse yet, he trails in. And this is very interesting here in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Our model, the Ouija board models, looked at some of this, and we see DJ Trump had a much more difficult time in Michigan and Wisconsin. In Pennsylvania, depending whom's on the ballot, Joe Biden hails out of Stratton, Pennsylvania, as did the ancestor of Hillary Clinton. And it was by a few points. Excuse me. What will impact the election is who the candidate comes out of the Democratic Party is and how it's done. You have two very strong candidates from the left in the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders, whom we support. Elizabeth Warren from the Commonwealth. Very strong, has a very good organization there. And then Beto O'Rourke, he's kind of a wild card in there. He's our number 3. We'll see where he goes. On WBRN, the Boston Red Network, we don't tell people how to vote. That's their own selection. But anyway, this Fox News poll, I don't trust much of Fox News, showed him trailing Biden by 11 points. That's national. Disregard that. Bernie by 5, and lesser known Democrats. The poll also found him running 2 points behind Elizabeth Warren, and that's in the margin of error. And the mayor, Alfred B. Newman, out of South Bend, who most people didn't know, Buda Grand, 40 to 41. But what will the 15 to 20% in the middle be thinking about when they actually begin to focus on the race? This is hardly a monolithic group, no doubt about that. Many of the independents historically have leaned to, or what they call now, Republican leaners, libertarians, etc. Republicans should hope that they don't look at Trump and his administration and focus on the free seas, chaos, conflict, and confidence. Do they see a president and his team on top of the job, knowledgeable, possessing the right skills, addressing problems in an organized and disciplined way? Well, that's absolutely not. But that is one of the things, the chaos model. It's not the last time it's run. The old line about no drama. Obama was more right than not. These days, the atmosphere of the White House is more like that of a soap opera and WWE. Well, yeah, but that appeals to that 35% core support. And within that core support, a lot of Republicans that back DJ is because he basically has been co-opted by their programs, particularly old man McConnell in the Senate. His backing of DJ Trump and the court nominees, the idea is to pack the court up. They would have you think that it's to repeal Roe v. Wade. Well, yeah, Roe v. Wade is there. That, again, is one of the cementers. But they basically want a business-friendly Supreme Court that will take care of the business interests. That is the primary aim of their situation. To the extent voters are focused on these questions, some Democratic candidates might be better than others in addressing them, while others might bring their own baggage into the race, allowing the focus to shift to a choice between some flawed nominees. Not sure what he's talking about there. But again, that's a different position. Don't forget that 211 out of 222 national polls conducted since Trump took office, they name a bunch of them, the Wall Street Journal and Pew, have shown his disapproval, higher than his approval rating That doesn't matter a whole lot there. It boils down to money, and they've got almost an infinite supply of money. The Trump campaign, its various packs of appendages, they have got their fake news machine going. They've got oppositional research, and this was something they had in 2016. And the Republicans, historically, when we talk about micro polling, etc., have been very good at that till Barack Obama and his team came along. And the reason for that was they came out of a business-centric environment where people are being micro-polled to death. Google and company. Anyway, let me finish this up. The old debate on whether it's better to nominate a candidate who can motivate the party's base, or one who reaches to the middle, appealing to independents. That's what Democrats are doing. And swing voters, presenting a choice of walking and chewing gum. You can do both. These, where these things come into conflict, is the issue that the most motivated base within the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are often the ones that on the that graph on the non-ideological and least ideological driven voter in the middle. Trump has certainly picked the base motivator model, effectively conceding the middle to the Democrats if they choose to take it in. There's no doubt about this. We'll look at a little bit of Amy Walter here, getting perspective on the presidency. There'll be several of these coming up here. We'll start with her. She was at Presidential Ideas Festival, aka hosted again by the University of Virginia's Miller Center, while I asked presidential scholars from administration officials to put this president and his current political movement into more thorough historic context. Most importantly, I wanted to get a better understanding of whether Trump's presidency is an outliner, or is it a start of a trend with the growing possibility of impeachment proceedings. Discount that. I wanted to get the historical guidance on whether we are in a constitutional crisis. And you can check Amy Walter out on her the evaluation of the executive. It's her podcast that's on NPR. One of the things that many participants in the conference stress, that the country and its constitution are incredibly resilient. No doubt about that. We've said that here, and so did the late great Jerry Pippin. But since the end of the Civil War, that rubber band has been stretched but never broken. Well, yeah, there's no doubt about that. And there are reasons for that, and as bad as things seem and feel in our country, but to ordinary people, depending on where they are, if they have employment, if they can pay their bills, etc., everything is peachy, peachy, peachy. Now, if they happen to be students with ever increasing debt out there, it is not peachy, peachy, peachy. Or as the old time phrase, our friend down in Australia used the term, but that is in Australia, Dave Jones, hunky dory. He's not the only one. A lot of people did that well. Everything's moving along pretty well. But that's not the case for many people. There's the college situation. There's also medical bills forcing people into bankruptcy. Elizabeth Warren has been articulating that. And there was a segment she was talking about when she was a Republican, but not very active. But where she got really into things was with bankruptcies. And what the Joe Bidens of the world and various other people allowed the credit card companies to do. It made it much harder for people to bankrupt out. Now they basically have a discharge plan, if there's any assets to discharge. And that is where it is. And also the card companies have forced people into arbitration rather than going into court and duking it out there. Anyway, Susan Rice, she was National Security Advisor. Another neocon. What do I think is that we need to understand this moment and the context of broad sweep history. If you think about whether the U.S. has been in the kind of domestic challenges and international challenges we have faced in the past, as bad as the moment may seem in the present, it doesn't compare to the Civil War. Well, no. We are not having hundreds of thousands of people killed in streets, roads, creeks, and etc. It doesn't compare to challenges we faced with the fascists in World War II. Well, the fascists still around. They were marching in Charlottesville too. And Nazism. Well, we got the Nazis around. They had Nazis in D.J. Trump's cabinet with old Steve Bannon. It doesn't compare to the convolutions of the 60s when people who looked like me, I'm glad she knows that, she's from Birmingham, Alabama, were being beaten, dogs, Our cities were burning, and the turmoil on the college campuses. The right wing at one time last year fomented turmoil on the college campuses. They brought in the bully boys and girls in these so-called militias, and they came in to confront truth tellers, progressive type people in places like Berkeley, etc. They ran that out to the max. They marched in Seattle and various other cities. Well, what happens to these drumbeat operations? It gets to the point they get old. And then they made their grand finale. They won't replace us in Charlottesville. Have a High, who we always honor on Friday nights, was murdered by those forces. And there's not that much of the news. So what happens in this particular business model, corporate business model? DJ Trump is every day. Now he's going to the UK to meet the Queen, and he's already endorsed the right-wing Boris Johnson, who was one time a mayor of London. But he's long gone from that. He's talking about Brexit. Brexit is a disaster for the British economy. Let me move on with some argued that the perspective is unrealistic at a time when the institutions and rules that have guided the country and keep it from veering off the rails are broken. Social media has helped to accelerate the best and worst impulses of human beings, making it harder than ever to feel like we have a grasp of truth or reality. Well, you always get in trouble, not necessarily reality, when you should go to truth. One person's truth is the other person's fiction. And DJ Trump has exploited this by turning fake events into real events. What to stop the next president from sowing chaos and division in the country the way Trump did, has been able to do so effectively with Twitter. Well, Twitter has long been an instrument to use, and they go on here to G.W. Bush's advisor, Uncle Carl. All these are related. However, he is not convinced that any other person could emulate Trump's presidency, labeling Trump as a sui generis. He told me that I don't see the institution of the presidency will be altered dramatically by him. It's hard to sustain the level of public attention to your own personal agenda, and that is long and hard and harsh. He's instrumental to the kind of criticism that normal political figures that try to avoid. Well, yeah, it is a new model, and it is a model based on publicity. The more publicity you get, the better you are off. Doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. It just matters you're in the press every day. You drown out other people, but you have to have the cooperation of monopoly media to bring you over the threshold, so to speak. And that is what's happening because they have an interest in trying to do it. Now, she mentions here, we want Albert Gore of Tennessee acceding into the ultimate decision of the Supreme Court. Shouldn't have done it, but the people were not, in spite of his disagreement with it. Most Americans accepted legitimacy. We're talking here about G.W. Bush. Well, there was talk on the other side, had the shoe landed, that they wanted Billy Graham and various other people to organize. They would have spent millions of dollars advertising in newspapers, that Al Gore pulled it off, and they would have marched to Washington and caused as much confusion as they could have caused. But yet the progressives, by and large, just stayed home and took it. Most pundits and voters, however, are comparing this era to Watergate, a mistake that the last time the country saw the bonds of a constitution truly stretched. While the moment was horrible for the country to make it through, University of Virginia's presidential historian Barbara Perry told me it is a pristine example of the separation of powers and the checks and balances and the delicate balance working to perfection. A constitutional crisis was averted because each of the three branches, and I would even include the media of all of them. Well, the media is not that important anymore. Dr. Perry, in the constitutional structure that the founding fathers had envisioned, it worked, and we're working together to come to justice. In other words, Watergate showed us that the Constitution worked just as the founding fathers had intended it to do. Well, it worked because, excuse me, of the political time in the 70s, the country was much more progressive than it is now, much less polarized. It had come off the Warren Court, but yet the people appointed there, I believe, who was it there? That was the Minnesota Twins, Berger and company were there. They were Republicans, but more in a moderate vein. So you had a different type of situation going on. You had an old-timer named Maximum John Sirica, and he was able to run the court, the grand juries, and then you had old Sam Ervin, a folksy type character, he's a racist, but was able to chair the hearings and bring it to the majority of people. And you had John Dean. John Dean's still around, that dropped the goods, and of course one shoe after the other fell on Tricky Dick. But remember, Tricky left for California, and the Republican Party was still there. They sent a character named Gerald Ford, a conservative out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, the same place as Mr. Amos is from, the libertarian that called for DJ Trump's impeachment. I think we're on the crest of a constitutional crisis. Dr. Perry told me last week. She argues that it remains to be seen whether the delicate balance, separation of powers, checks and balances that the founders had devised will work. So far, they are not. When I asked her whether it isn't working, she pointed to the election of Trump in the first place. Well, she argued that the founders didn't intend for there to be a demagogues in office. In fact, they hoped that the Electoral College would account for the populism that could lead to the demagogues. Well, demagogues are always out there. In the instance, ironically, it actually protected demagogues in the office. Congress is an institution. Institutional check on the presidential powers is not working. The president still enjoys. This is because it is working. Unified Republican support in both the House and in the Senate. They mentioned Justin. Let me finish this up. People are not part of this delicate balance in any way that the founders didn't anticipate. And Dr. Perry said, because they view people as European male property owners Now we have universal suffrage and the social media 24/7 informing people, so people will have a role here. But amidst, it's like I was talking to a conservative, a Catholic, that said, well, we got some information. But the information she got was in minutes or seconds, and it was on immigration, and she and this other conservative were talking. They really didn't understand the situation. The immigrants that are coming to the border in places like El Paso, San Diego, etc., they're just marching up there and at the turnstile, so to speak, and surrendering. That's all they're doing. They're not creeping across. They're just literally walking out of Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, etc., and showing up at the gates of the new Lady Liberty, so to speak, and that is it. That's the story. And they're not creeping by anything like that. A wall would not prevent that because they're just walking through the gate. The people that are climbing the wall, that's a totally different situation. This isn't a failing of the Constitution, but is a reminder of how credibly resilient and flexible the document is. Amendments to the Constitution expand the electorate, and that is the electorate. It has the power to hold the president accountable. Well, very difficult to do that. What the progressives and Democrats have to do is model a model that will deal with the Twitter program of DJ Trump, just as the former mayor of the ghetto of Newark, Mr. Booker, Senator Booker now, was dethroned as the Twitter king by DJ Trump. And of course, DJ Trump was building following based upon many things, including the infamous we got that. The infamous bots. Impeachment, would it be a debacle? Let me just check our time. We probably got to do the sports. We're running. Yeah, we're running late. This will probably be the last story we'll have today. George Will is writing here on the 31st of May. If Congressional Democrats will temper their enthusiasm for impeachment with vicinity and about the nation's needs and their political self-interest, they will understand the self-defeating nature of foredoomed attempts to remove a president for aesthetic reasons, the reasons that are not trivial but are insufficient. And this is the whole argument across here, particularly when most all congressional Republicans are complicit in and by their silence about DJ Trump's comportment. Impeachment can be a retrospective for offenses committed, or prospective to prevent probable future injuries to the nation. That is from Greg Vina, is a Madison scholar par excellence and author of the new book, Prudence. Oh boy. The Democrats would contemplate old Whig Burke and Lincoln in the politics of prudence. Elsewhere he writes, this is about what he calls one of the Constitution's most solemn powers. The purpose of impeachment is not punitive. It is prophylactic. Criminal law looks backwards towards offenses committed. The objective of impeachment is not to exact vengeance. It is to protect the public agenda against future acts of recklessness or abuse. Attempting to overturn the result of a presidential election is a momentous undertaking. In 1998, Republicans impeached Bill Clinton for lying about sex with an intern. Well, sex with an intern, Monica Lewinsky, was a single act. The public punished them for all is considered a gross disproportionate response. Today, many Democrats are fixated on DJ Trump, but it's not for an intern. It's for many, many offenses there, including obstruction of justice. Conspiracy with the Russian Federation, that's not a strong case. And let's see. What can accurately be called aesthetic considerations are, however, powerfully germane. As Hamilton wrote, that's in Federalist Papers 65, impeachment offense should relate chiefly to injuries done immediately to the society itself. Well, Professor Reed would be happy about that. He loves a Hamilton. Of course, he's exposed the true nature of Hamilton as a liar. Trump, in such a liar and increasingly contemptible coarseness are reprehensible, as was Tricky Dick. Well, Tricky Dick was a different situation because they are constant in public and hence desensitizing. They will inflict a more long-term damage to America's civil life than Tricky Dick. There's no doubt about that. Tricky Dick had fascists around with his Southern strategy, but they were only slipped out at night. That an offense is impeachable doesn't mean it warrants impeachment. There's no doubt about that. That's Vina there. Potential impeachers must consider the general public context of the time, including the potential public reaction. Democrats face two lamentable but unnameable facts. Trump was elected because many million Americans enjoyed his bullishness, and he was essentially promised to govern as a lout. Promise keeping would be an unusual ground for impeachment. Moreover, impeachment will not result in Trump's removal, considers today's serpent behavior of most Republican congressional Republicans, which stirs fragrant memories of the. Now, this is very interesting. Here, vigorous obedience of many members of the Communist Party to Stalin in the late 30s until August the 1st, 1939. Stalin wanted, and so the CPUSA abdicated U.S. engagement in Europe's resistance to Hitler. Expansionism, however, when the date the Germans and Russians signed a non-aggression pact to a prelude to carving up Poland. The CPUSA initially pivoted to advocating U.S. non-involvement in the European affairs. Then on the 22nd of June 1941, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, and CPUSA lurched back to advocating maximum U.S. engagement to resist Hitler, and we're correct on that. Most congressional Republicans today, and this is it's a sad situation in the Washington Post. George Will compares the CPUSA to the Democratic Party. You're going to see much more of this dynamic DJ Trump running against socialism / communism or whatever, and the media bringing it out. There's no longer a nuclear threat from Democratic Republic of Korea. Republicans have moved from stirring a presidential dignity coward south when it comes to the most recent example. Trump, of course, endorsed the North, a ridiculously low IQ. That was on old Joe Biden. Well, it served its purpose to do that. Let me finish this up. CPU, boy, he's coming back for the second salve. CPUSA members in the 30s, reckoned by ideology, had a faith in the Soviet regime, but they identified with historically and therefore progressively invincibility. Today's congressional Republicans, blinded by their puppy-like devotion and leveraged by the terror of the conspicuous masses to whom they are devoted. Well, that is very interesting. Impeachment, it can be an instrument of civil hygiene. However, most of today's Senate Republicans strapping around the president's ankles are implausible hygienists. Well, there's no doubt about that, but it will, like, compares the CPUSA members in the 30s. They were fighting fascism there. Blinkened by ideology. It says, in other words, communist ideology, closed their eyes. But there was a war there that was incredible. That's from the Washington Post. Let's go and do the sports here. Baseball tourney is coming up. 64 on the road, sort of like in basketball. And it will be in Omaha, Nebraska, College World Series. It's called. Some of the favorites are UCLA, Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, Georgia Tech, Arkansas, Georgia, Frets, Texas Tech, Louisville. The dark horses, East Carolina, UC Santa Barbara, Fresno State, LSU. LSU used to be pretty good. The maybes, Oklahoma State, Stanford, North Carolina, West Virginia, Oregon State, the Ducks. And who will advance? UCLA, Vanderbilt, so forth and so on. Anyway, that does that one in. And let's see. The women's softball tournament, UCLA 6-2 over Arizona, and Oklahoma State battle. It was Oklahoma 6-1. We got that done. And to baseball last night, Orioles 9-6. Yankees are 4-1 over the Red Sox. The Pirates 9-4 over the Brewers in Pittsburgh, that is. And the Twins 5-3 over the Rays. The Nationals and Reds, it was Reds 9-3. The Tigers in Atlanta, it was 8-2. And the Rangers are 6-2 over the Royals in Texas. Cleveland and the White Sox on the south side of Chicago. Sox 2-1. The Cubs in 10, they were in St. Louis. Cardinals 2-1 there. Pretty even game. Both had, the Cubs had 6 hits and the Cards 5 hits, but they had a walk-off home run. The Rockies and Blue Jays, Rockies 13-6. The D-backs and Mets, it was Mets 5-4 in Arizona. The Astros and Athletics, good game going on there. Out in Oakland, 3-2 Astros over the Athletics. The Marlins and Padres in San Diego across the continent. 5-2 score there. Padres. Dodgers and Phillies, a very good Phillies team, but nonetheless, Dodgers had, it was 6-3. Dodgers had 12 hits, no errors. And the Phillies, 5 hits and no errors. And finally, the Angels and Mariners in Seattle, 4-3 was the score there. Mariners, 5 hits for the Mariners and 6 hits, no errors, and both no errors for the Angels. And let me just run the Vancouver Whitecaps, the 1-1 Laos, Sri Lankan 2-2. Sweden and Korea, South Korea, Sweden 1-0 there. France 2-1 over China. This was Brøndby 4-2 over Randers FC, whoever they are. And the New York Red Bulls 4-0. They shut out the Birmingham Steel FC. Mali and France. France 3-2 in that contest. Saudi Arabia and Panama. Panama 2-1. South Africa and Portugal, a 1-1 tie there. South Korea 2-1 over Argentina. And let's see, who else can we bring? Well, the St. Pat's 1-1 in Cork. That's evidently in Ireland. And let me see here. Boy, there's a lot of football teams around here. And the Bali United won, and Gujarat 0. Anyway, that is the football scores. That will do it for us. We'll see you on the political side. Boston Red on the Monday morning. A quarterback on a Monday morning. I don't know if we'll have any special program. Well, we will. We'll have not special program. We'll have an open source report. And a numbers man, that is our macroeconomics program. That comes this weekend. So we have a full slate here. We were traveling early in the week, having some health tests done. And we'll have some consultation done next week. And in a week, we'll be off for a few days, having a procedure done. And not sure how long we'll be gone, but before we return, as they say, the airwaves, probably a week, 10 days, maybe not. We'll see. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on the Monday morning quarterback. Happy Eid to those doing a Ramadan.